The three principal aspects of the path. This definite emergence, bodhicitta, and the correct view of reality. In addition to being the essence of all of Buddha's teachings, I'm convinced that regardless of the name that we give, regardless of the tradition that we're following, regardless of the religion or non-religion that we're following, these are the characteristics that need to be developed to reach a state of peace. It's not about the three principal aspects of the path according to the Gelupa tradition, according to Lama Tsongkhapa, according to Buddhism. In my opinion, it goes much farther, much beyond. And I'm not saying that Buddhism has the key to the truth. What I'm saying is, regardless of the name that we give, to reach a state of balance and peace, one needs to take certain steps, and we can give them 1,000 different names. And here, Lama Tsongkhapa is able to summarize in these, summarize this in three main aspects, three main steps. And so this first step, it's not something related to philosophy that we're going to learn. No, in our lives, if we really want to grow spiritually, what do we need to do? And in my opinion, these points are valid for a Buddhist, for a Christian, for an atheist. All of these points are fundamental. That's my point of view. So let's start with the first, verse number 3. And we have, for each of the three principal aspects of the path, if I'm not wrong, there are about 3 different verses for each one. So we have 3 verses, and then another 3 for bodhicitta, and 5 for the correct view of reality. And it's interesting because Lama Tsongkhapa presents them following a logic that's very real, where he first says, before explaining how to develop these characteristics, he tells us why, because he starts from a very a simple basis, which is we'll never do anything if we don't want to do it. So the first step to do anything is to desire it, to want it. And so we need somehow to, how can I say, fall in love with that thing, flirt at the beginning, get to the point of saying, yes, really, I want it. We need to get we need to find that passion. And if we don't have that passion, then afterwards we're not going to put the effort into following through with the necessary steps or have constancy. So this first verse talks about why we need to develop this step. Without a completely pure renunciation, there's no way to pacify the attachment that seeks pleasurable effects in the ocean of samsara. Also, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Therefore, seek renunciation from the beginning. Let's remember that the word renunciation is a translation that is not very correct. The more appropriate, the more correct term would be definite emergence. In Tibetan, it says Nam dag nejun me par sitsoyi detrar donir shiwe tamela sila kampe yikyan luchenam kune chingchir toma nejunsel. Without a definite emergence that's completely pure. There's no way to pacify the the attachment that seeks pleasurable effects in the ocean of samsara. Let's try to understand what we mean by definite emergence, often referred to as renunciation. It's also said that definite emergence is love towards oneself, and bodhicitta is love towards others. Traditionally, a metaphor is used, the one of a prison. So let's imagine that we're inside a prison. What's the first thing necessary to to execute a prison break? First, one needs to know that one is inside prison and want to get out. Because if I'm in a prison and I think, oh, but the Wednesday soup is pretty good, or no, I have friends here and there, I feel somehow safe here. Let's imagine if we were born in that prison and we've never seen anything outside. Is it true that there's reality outside these walls? If I don't develop a deep desire, a strong and sincere desire to want to get out of the prison, who would make me put in so much energy to risk breaking out? There's a beautiful film, with Morgan Freeman, who was imprisoned erroneously, and for years he planned his prison break. And then day after day, he dug a tunnel, and then one day was able to break free. What gave him that effort, that strength to do that? The desire to do that. One says, I don't want to be here anymore. So I do what's necessary to get out. This definite emergence is the desire to get out of this state of suffering. And it's also this state of this desire to want to reach a state of balance and joy. They're two sides of the same coin. On one side says, I can't stay here any longer. And it's also saying, I want to be there. If someone has a bad sickness where the process of healing is not easy, the first step in the healing process is wanting to be healed and believing that one can be healed. Because if I don't believe that, I won't put effort into the treatment. Because sometimes the healing, the treatment seems more difficult than the sickness itself. And if we're in that state where the treatment seems more difficult than the sickness, then we stay with our sickness. It's like saying, many times I saw situations where the people said, oh, I know what I'm doing is wrong, is bad for me, but let's remember, where did I hear this recently? I heard this, that anything that comes before but, I mean, you can say what you want, but then if you put a but, then it's just over. If one says, yes, I know that this way of behaving is not right, I shouldn't act like this, I shouldn't smoke like this, but it's difficult, but I don't really feel like it, but I like it, but I'll never be able to do differently. Nobody's died from this. What happens is to manage to get out of something that one is entrapped in, one needs to have both the awareness of not wanting to be in that situation and the determination of this feeling of like general disgust, or say, no, I don't want to be in this situation anymore. I think that we've all had this experience where one's in a situation and then one day it comes and we just cannot handle it anymore. So on one side we need that, but together with that we need also the real trust, the real belief that we can get out of this situation and reach the opposite. So I don't just not want sickness, I want a state of health, because if I realize that where I am is not good, but I don't believe that there's something else, then I won't put effort into change. And this is what happens when one says, I know it's not good, but it's when I'm not able to see the alternative. So without a certainty, without this belief that we can really get out of prison, we will never be able to even begin the process for their prison break. Even if someone digs a tunnel for me, maybe I think I don't even trust. I back out. But instead, if it's something that I have deeply inside myself, where I know that I don't want to be in that situation, and I see myself in the opposite. I repeat, so aversion for the sickness and attraction for the state of health for which I believe I can reach, then I am ready and able to face come what may, to whatever comes, to reach that. And this shows us that we do what we do. We do what we want to do. So along our spiritual path, the first step is to ask ourselves what we want. Sometimes we use spiritual methods for mundane reasons. Or rather, I meditate, I pray, I accumulate mantras, I study philosophy. Why? Because I want to be well, because I want to have a good relationship with this person, or because I want to heal my traumas. These are positive things. Because I want to have power and wealth, and because I want to be the good Buddhist. Or maybe 1,000 different things that can come as well. And what happens with that is that actually we don't have a direction that is very coherent, is consistent, because this feeling is lacking, this certainty to be able to emerge, to get out of samsara and go towards nirvana. So in this first characteristic, where we develop the so-called definite emergence, renunciation, in a few words, it is a kind of aversion, nausea for samsara, and a deep love for nirvana. The two things go together. So without a completely pure renunciation, completely pure means there's a difference between a desire of getting out of samsara, which is superficial and momentary, like there's a specific moment where one follows certain teachings. There's that day where one says, I want to get out of samsara, and then one turns around and sees a cute girl or boy, and one says, oh, samsara can wait. So what happens, these are Nechung Pusung in Tibetan, this kind of, this definite emergence that are momentary. Kind of, it's also, we call it like fire made from straw. This is a an Italian saying. which is fine, but we need something deeper. So without a completely pure um, renunciation, there is no way to pacify the attachment that seeks pleasurable effects in the ocean of samsara. The the um, the cyclic existence called samsara, it's a cycle of three things. And to understand it well, then we need to look at the 12 links of interdependence. Which the 12 links can be summarized in 3 points. We have mental defilements, ignorance at the basis. And by ignorance, I mean not the lack of knowledge, but the fact that we relate with ourselves and with the world in an incongruent way, inconsistent way. Reality appears to us as being completely disconnected, independent, objective, when actually it's interdependent and subjective. What is impermanent appears to us as being permanent. This grasping at reality that seems independent and objective is a form of ignorance, and this ignorance creates a kind of distance that creates this obsession of self-gratification, this egocentric mind that then creates dissatisfaction and anger and envy, these so-called mental defilements. What do we do with mental defilements? We just stay still? No. We need to interact physically, verbally, mentally, and we act. Every action, every interaction brings a result. When that action manifests a result and we experience a result of our actions, how do we react? With attachment, anger, indifference, desire, aversion, fear, etc., etc., again with the same mental defilements. And so we act again, and then they are going to bring their results, and with their results, we're going to act again, this constant cycle. In Sanskrit, it's called samsara. It's not a place, it's an inner cycle. A being can be here with us, but be outside of samsara. The place, the place is not important. Sometimes we think that it's a kind of place where you can be taken to. It's a fundamental mistake to say I've been born in samsara, take me to nirvana, because samsara literally means cycle. The cycle of what? Mental defilements, ignorance, jealousy, attachment, etc., and action, karma, and result. The result is suffering of two types. There's suffering of suffering, and then there's the suffering of change that actually manifests as a state of pleasure. So what happens that in front of that, we're constantly in this cycle of into this cycle that is very, very difficult to change. This is what we mean by samsara. To understand it well, you can divide it into 3 parts. It's described. We have, where's my mala? Let's imagine the mala that turns round. We have 3 things here: that he who turns, the action of turning, and the place that it's turning. That which turns, where is samsara? It's the action of turning. The one turning is us. The place is the reality in which we find ourselves. So samsara is the cycle. It's this movement. If it's still, then there's no samsara. So it's possible to get out of samsara because one can stop turning. A little bit like saying, I can be in the same place and not be turning. I can stop turning and go somewhere else or be there. What's important to understand this, because when we talk about getting out of the cycle of some suffering, out of the cycle of samsara, it's not a place. It's not a place where we're the victim of something else. I mean, just look about. Just it's enough to look at our planet. If it weren't for the ignorance of those living here, it could be a total. It could be a complete heaven. What makes this place? What makes this place in certain places an absolute hell? Our own mental defilements, selfishness, anger, attachment, ignorance, and the actions done with these minds. It's this vicious cycle that's created. Also with the relationships created with others. If you act violently towards me and I suffer, what's our natural reaction in front of that kind of suffering? Aversion. I don't want that. So where there's aversion, then I need to get away. So again, I need to remove myself from this. There's more violence, more distance. So without the total certainty of saying that samsara is horrible, regardless of where I am, I'm in a beautiful part of the planet, I have wonderful conditions. I'm not. Lama Ganchen used to use this term, saying, here in Albagnano, we're not in we're not in the deepest part of samsara. We're floating. We're floating in samsara, where we can breathe a little bit. But there are some realities on this, some realities that are very, very heavy. So you can be in the most, but you can also be in the most beautiful place ever and be in one of the deepest hell. Because there's some people who can also be in difficult places, difficult situations, and be at peace. It's difficult, but it's possible. So what happens, though, there's no way to pacify the attachment that seeks pleasurable effects in the ocean of samsara. In this ocean of cyclic existence, what happens? We're in this cycle of samsara. But instead of wanting to get out of samsara, what we want is to have, how can I say, momentary relief. If you were asked very sincerely, not answer with your head, but sincerely, what do you want? A long, do you want to get out of samsara after a very, very long and tiresome process, or do you want a comfortable samsara? Well, let's start with a comfortable samsara, right? This is what often happens. Because as long as I don't have the certainty, it's like saying I'm in prison. And if I don't have the total certainty to want to get out of prison, because I know that I don't want to be in the prison. It's maybe I know I've been into the worst parts of the prison, and there are some days where I'm in better parts, but I know that one day I'll have to go back to the dark parts of the prison. If I am not sure that I want to get out of that prison, what I'm looking for is to find comfort within prison. So I try to avoid problems here, make friends there. So what we constantly do is to try to have a comfortable life, the most comfortable life possible, to have as many pleasures as possible, staying within this vicious cycle. And as long as I don't want to get out of this cycle, there I will remain, because Often we spend our life trying to avoid problems and trying to get pleasure, facing ignorance, facing anger, developing compassion. What? Really? Really? In the meantime, okay, a little bit, and I feel better. But my real priority is I want pleasures. I want to avoid this. I want to have that. We stay completely in this cycle. So, without a certainty of wanting to emerge from samsara, without a completely pure renunciation, there's no way to pacify the attachment that seeks pleasurable effects in the ocean of samsara. As long as I'm in love with the pleasures of the prison, I will never try to get out, and I won't put effort into trying to get out. Also, by craving for cyclic existence, embodied beings are continuously bound. Therefore, seek definite emergence from the very beginning. So this craving for cyclic existence, Silakampa, makes reference to this attachment that we have to our own identity and to the I. We see ourselves as existing within a certain context, in a certain way. And this enormous attachment that we have of ourselves is what imprisons us. That's what makes us turn and constantly turn. And what I didn't say before is that the cycle is, here I am turning. Mental defilements, actions, results. The way this cycle comes about is through birth, aging, sickness, and death. Birth, aging, sickness, and death. Birth, aging, sickness, and death. From life to life and within one's own lifetime. We are constantly within one's lifetime. We start a psychophysical reality. We begin a moment of a certain kind. And as it begins, then it starts to age and to degenerate and end. And then another one starts. And we spend life to life with this. There are pleasurable aspects. There are aspects that are not pleasurable. But we are deeply attached to our own existence, to our own identity. It's a bit similar. We see this attachment because very often someone, even in front of a very difficult life, doesn't want to die. And when people normally want to take their own life, actually, it's not because they don't want to live. They don't want to suffer anymore. They can't find the effort, the strength to face their own suffering, and that's the only solution they find, unfortunately. If it were a solution, to stop suffering, one takes one's own life, then we would be if that really worked, we would be the first to support this way, but it's definitely not how it works, because dying is like sleeping. You fall asleep and you wake up and without remembering the previous day, but it's still you. So your conditionings come again. The cycles that haven't finished still need to come. So it doesn't resolve anything. So this strong attachment that we have to our own existence is something that also somehow keeps us grasped within this cycle, and it doesn't stop uh, when we um, when we move from one life to another. But we're ready to do anything to protect ourselves, even doing things that we know are not right. So, therefore, seek renunciation from the very beginning. In Tibetan, nejung, nebar is certainty, and jungwa means to emerge, this definite emergence. So, therefore, right from the beginning, one should ask himself, who am I? Who do I want to become? Where am I? Where do I want to go? So, without this deep desire, we can't get anywhere. In other words, to be able to develop this, we need to fall in love with nirvana. Somehow be absolutely disgusted by samsara, which doesn't mean being disgusted by this world or the world in which we live. It means looking at oneself in the mirror, and look at oneself in the eyes, and one says, I'm tired. I'm tired of acting with anger, with envy, and then I live the result of an action, and I act badly. I've got attachment on one side, anger on another. It seems like everything's fine, and then jealousy comes out. Enough is enough. Really, I want for a moment to be at peace with myself and with others. I want deeply to be at peace with myself and with others. In other words, I want to be well with myself and with others independently of where I am, with whom I am, and in the situation in which I find myself. Because here, what's called this 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 um, this attachment for the effects in the ocean of samsara, it is this hope that things will be better at some point. We'll be happy when this is like that. But from our own experience, what happens when we're able to do what we want? There's something else that we want, or something else we want to change, right? There's also this saying that when a problem finishes, a new one pops up, and if we can't find a problem, we invent them. But for some reason, there's this strange expectation that when things will be the way we think they should be, when I will be able to have what I want and avoid what I don't want, and not be separated from what I like, then I'll be happy. And we have this idea since children. Uh, Children who say, when I won't have to go to school anymore, I'll be happy. And then at a certain point, oh, how wonderful it was when I would go to school. And then we say, oh, when I'll be able to go with this person, I'll be happy. And then once I don't have to be in this situation anymore, I'll be happy. Once I'm cured of the sickness, I'll be happy. Here and there. And at the end of the day, there's a kind of constant state of malaise, unhappiness, and mixed with some pleasures. But this is this constant cycle. And here, to understand this better, Buddha showed us the difference between suffering, the suffering of suffering, and the suffering of change, and the all-permeating suffering. Samsara manifests itself in this cycle with these three sufferings. We said there's mental defilements, dissatisfaction, anger, etc. The actions of body, speech, and mind that we do based on these negative minds, and the result manifests in suffering. The suffering is of two types. There are three types of suffering. In this case, as they manifest, there are two types. The suffering of suffering and the suffering of change, or the suffering that changes. And then there's the all-permeating suffering. But this manifestation is of two types of suffering. The suffering of suffering is everything that we normally call suffering, or rather physical suffering and mental suffering. Physical suffering, we have pain, heat and cold and hunger and thirst. Mental suffering, fear, anger, sadness, anxiety, etc., etc. All the sensations, the mental sensations that we want to that we want to end as soon as possible, and when they end, we don't want them to come back. That's a definition of suffering. And pleasure, instead, they're all the sensations that we have, that when we have these feelings, we don't want them to end, and when they do end, we want them to come back as soon as possible. So we have physical suffering and mental suffering, and this is what we normally call suffering. And when we talk about getting out of suffering, we make reference to this. Buddha added another. He said there's also the suffering that changes, or the suffering of change. The suffering of change, these are sensations that apparently seem pleasurable. They show themselves as being pleasurable, an inner sensation of pleasure, but when upheld, they transform inevitably into sensations of pain. A classic example is drinking water. I'm thirsty, I drink water, and I feel better. It's pleasurable. I keep drinking water, one glass after the other. What happens? The more water I drink, the better off I am? No. Little by little, the pleasure diminishes, and then after the third liter of water, it's torture. And that's the same for all our pleasures of body. A caress, for example. Someone we love, it caresses us. And it goes on. Half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour and a quarter. It goes on and on. Is that feeling of pleasure always the same? No, at a certain point, if someone wants to be nice, they say, oh, excuse me, I really need to get up and go to the bathroom. One finds an excuse to get out of that pseudo-torture. And that's the same for anything. So the suffering of change, they're all things that manifest as pleasurable, but when maintained, they become suffering. So they're all the things that the more I have, the worse off I am, not the better off I am. And there are things that the more I have, the better off I am. What are some examples of that? Things that the more I have, the more they can uphold a state of well-being. What about money? And if someone says no, I say, okay, give me your money. But the reality is I've never met anyone who's able to reach a state of well-being with having a lot of money in his hands. It's actually the opposite. The only things that guarantee going back to money for a second, the problem with money, that there's an illusion, this is very strange. There's this illusion that it's a resource through which I can satisfy every desire or do well. Sometimes justifying that we're doing good or satisfying our own ego. It doesn't mean that it's not a resource that can't be used well, but it's not something that is able to sustain a state of well-being. Obviously, at some point, one day we die. And in some teachings it says, during life we accumulate a lot of negative energy to get money, tricking others, coming into conflict. You waste a tremendous amount of energy to gain material wealth, negative energy, and then one day you die. You bring the negative energy that you created with you. The money stays here. You write a detailed will, but everybody fights. No one respects it. They keep your money, and you have your negative karma. So it's not it's not good. It's not something that has a real ability to sustain a state of well-being, which doesn't mean that it's something negative or bad in itself. It's neutral. Depends on how it's used. So suffering of change are all those things that the more I have, the worse off I am. But what are the things that the more I have, the better off I am? Satisfaction, patience, stability, awareness, wisdom, generosity. Our inner qualities, the more we have, the better off we are. So the suffering of change, those moments of relief where one feels better and one thinks that that's the solution. And that's why, there are two possible metaphors. One is the metaphor of the seesaw. And so when it's down, I want to go back up, and when I'm up, when it's up, I do everything possible to stay up. But what's the nature of the game? That when I go up, then I'm going to come back down. And when I'm down, I want to go back up. And when I'm up, I'm afraid that it's going to come down. And the solution isn't keeping the seesaw up. The solution is getting off of the seesaw. And the seesaw is the all-pervasive suffering. Our body and mind that's polluted by our own mental defilements and the karma, the actions done with these minds. As long as our being is polluted by ignorance and jealousy and anger, etc., and as long as we have this karmic force, the union of these two is suffering. So either I get off of this, or sooner or later it's going to keep showing up. And another example would be something that stinks. And once I smell that bad smell, that's the suffering of suffering. Then I spray some perfume, some air freshener, and I don't smell the stink anymore, but actually it's still there. So we spend our life trying to freshen the air to not smell the stink. Maybe sometimes we even cover it with thick plastic, but sooner or later it comes out. Sometimes we trip over it, but the real solution isn't covering or having an infinite amount of air freshener. The solution is to take the stink away. So when it manifests, it's the suffering of suffering. When we put on perfume or air freshener, it's the suffering of change. But the putrid stink is actually the all-pervasive suffering, and it's called all-pervasive because it doesn't matter where we go, we bring it with us. It's like having a filter of dirty lenses. No matter what I see everything as being dirty. So when we want to get out of samsara, it's actually being able to see that all-pervasive suffering, see our body that's polluted, by our negative defilements and our karma, and saying, I don't want this, to have nausea, be disgusted by it. And the word renunciation was often used because there is something that does, there is something that is linked a little bit to sacrifice, because we're attached to pleasurable things in samsara. But it's not that there are it's not that our sensory pleasures are bad in and of themselves. There's nothing wrong with the pleasures of the body, of having something beautiful. There's nothing wrong with having a positive recognition. So, worldly pleasures are not bad in and of themselves, but they just can't sustain what we um, what we attribute to them. Sometimes people come to me and they talk maybe questions related to a couple. And the answer is the other person in the couple is not the cause of your suffering, and is neither the cause of your suffering nor the source of your happiness. If you What do we do to those close to us? We project ourselves onto them. So, but if we are happy, we should be happy regardless of who we're with. If we're unhappy, we'll be unhappy regardless of who we'll be with. Once I went to talk. I went to talk at an association of older people, the the old age, and it went really well. But two people came afterwards, and they said, "How is it? How can you come so arrogantly and talk to us about peace and balance?" And and you can see that sometimes when you're unhappy, seeing someone who is balanced and happy, that it's it rubs me the wrong way. But this is a possible dynamic. So if I'm really unhappy, it can happen that being with someone who is balanced, who is happy, sometimes being close to someone balanced is it's like a mirror that shows me how bad off I am. And that's why often when we are in a bad state, we look for someone who's worse off than we are, because we often compare ourselves. We base ourselves on comparison. We say, oh, okay, I'm not so bad off. So as long I'm taken by my mental defects and the karmic force of my own actions, it doesn't matter where I go, with whom I spend my time, and in what situation I find myself with, suffering will come out, and I will keep turning in this cycle of suffering, suffering of change, and I'll keep going up and down. And sometimes we have a very short-term memory. So when we're up on the seesaw, we have this idea that we can stay up there forever, and then and then when we fall down, we want to go back up with this illusion that once we're up, we'll stay up forever. I don't know if you've ever happened. We've heard someone say, or you've said yourself, they say, oh, I can't spend my whole life like this. When someone says this, I think, sometimes I say it, sometimes I don't. Don't worry. It's not going to stay like this forever. It's going to get better or it's going to get worse, but it's not going to stay like this. And when there's a beautiful moment, what do we say? Oh, I hope it just stays like this forever. When is that possible? No, no matter how beautiful that moment is, sooner or later it's going to end. You go up, and then sooner or later, down, and then you're down, and sooner or later get back up. In this moment, one needs to say, I want to get off this game, get off this ride. Because if we don't have this deep desire and to get out, and there are two parts. two parts of renunciation. There is this part of sacrificing this kind of these mundane pleasures. Nothing against mundane pleasures, but it's not enough. And I repeat, there's nothing against them, but it's not enough. So we need to project our happiness somewhere else. But there's no sacrifice. We don't need to leave anything good. We need to desire something better. One thing is, I need to throw this away to get that. So to free myself from samsara, I need to sacrifice a part of me. No. Here, it's not about sacrificing something. It's about desiring something more, something better. I really want to reach this state of peace so I can be well with myself independently of where I am, with whom I am, and in the situation I find myself. How can I do this? And here we get into the next verses that say, Dechor nyeka se la long me pa, yi la gompat sedi nan shedok, la mi lu korwe dunel nam, yang sampe chima nang shedok. Actually, the third verse makes reference, we recognize this moment where this inner, where this inner state arises. It says, verse number 4, freedom and endowments are difficult to find and life is short. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is eliminated. By thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unfailing, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclic existence, attraction to the appearances of future lives is eliminated. By gaining familiar with this, attraction to the appearance of this life is eliminated. So the first thing is, here it says, freedom and endowments are difficult to find and life is short. What are these freedom and endowments? There are 18 characteristics that constitute the freedom and endowments of a human rebirth. We can go into many details. For me, the best description in Lochang, it says to have the minimum necessary, materially speaking, for a healthy, comfortable survival, let's say, having someone who guides us correctly along the spiritual path, and having the desire to walk, to practice. These are the three prerequisites. Let's look at the first one. On this planet, how many of us are there? About 8 billion, we're told, at least. There's a lot of people. Among all these people, in your opinion, what's the percentage of those who unfortunately don't have food to eat? Those who have a hard time surviving? Those who live in a state of fear for their survival? Do you think it's a very, very small minority? Unfortunately, there are many, many, many. I had seen this many years ago. It talked about 2 billion, and the current numbers I don't have. That's not a small amount of people. What happens when someone doesn't have the minimum resources to survive? One's energy goes all there. It's important to remember that we are not better than those who are in those situations. We just have better conditions. I don't know how I would react if I found myself in a similar situation. Once in a while, I see in the news disastrous situations, and I see these people that that actually quite calm, being in the craziest, absurd situations. And I think hats off. I don't know how I would act, but the point is that when one doesn't have his own survival assured, all energy goes in that direction. There's no inner space to reflect on one's mental defilements, want to change habits, or to familiarize oneself with more virtuous states of mind. There are exceptions, but generally it's like this. And then it's also said that there's another about at least 2 billion. And here, this is when we were talking, when there were 6 billion, another 2 billion. The number is not important, but an enormous number of people who are just above the poverty line. And they dedicate their lives to to a kind of survival. But the day that they are not able to work, then they go under the poverty line. We saw this in Brazil. I mean, the number of people, entire families, that ended up on the street because during the pandemic, for example, an enormous quantity of people who they were just holding on, but then the restaurants closed and they lost their houses, whatever it was, and they ended up on the street. So what happens where one needs to work 12, 14, 16 hours a day to survive? Does one have time and space for something else? No. Then there's another part of the population where actually they make ends meet well enough, and most of us are part of this percentage where we live our lives. We have our lives. We have our work. We we put money aside for our annual nirvana, where we go on vacation, where we reach the maximum level of our existence, and then we go back to working, which maybe is not so meaningful, but we work a little. We work basically we work to live, and we live. We work to pay for the car that we need to go to work. I get home, and then during the day, to be productive, I drink a tremendous amount of coffee. I get home and I need to relax a little bit. So I get on the couch and I need to take some kind of sedative to relax and turn on the TV to forget. How many people live like that? Where there's no space for anything else, really. And then there are those, instead, they have a great material left, and then they're also a slave of pleasures or of the comparisons to others. Oh, I need to buy a bigger boat because, I knew someone who spent 2 years, even with panic attacks, because he wanted to buy a certain type of boat, and he wasn't able because his friends had bought certain types of barks, and if he couldn't buy the boat, then he was no longer in the game. He was a loser. But suffering is suffering. So there are those who don't have inner space for a spiritual path because they don't have time, or because they're trapped in trying to survive, or trying to survive among pleasures and trying to avoid suffering. And then there are those who are absolutely trapped in pleasures and they're not able to get out. And in all of this, those who have the minimum necessary materially without having to worry about their own survival, and at the same time have someone who guides them correctly on inner development, and have this desire to grow inside, unfortunately, is a very, very small percentage. Look around. Let's look around ourselves. W- you know, w- People sell what people buy. Advertising is based on what? Like, buy this product and you'll be more patient. You'll experience more inner stability. No, it's based on power, pleasures, wealth, etc., etc. And we live in the middle of all of this. And even within the religious realm, if we were to do a kind of survey, all the prayers that one requests, what's the percentage of prayers that are done for worldly aspects like love and health and like an exam that someone needs to do, study, work, and how many prayers are requested to develop more patience, to have a more sincere feeling of love, to grow more spiritually. There's much more of the first. And so very often we use spiritual means for worldly um, um, worldly things. So how many are able, how many have materially have material wealth enough to have their needs covered and have someone to guide them and want to walk the path. It's a minority of the minority. That's why it's said that it's difficult to obtain. It's difficult to find. Buddha Shakyamuni said that having these conditions is similar. The probability among all the beings, the probability of having these conditions is the probability of a turtle that lives at the bottom of the ocean, that lives centuries and centuries, this turtle, and comes up for air once every 100 years. And above on the ocean, there's a golden buoy, and the turtle is blind and deaf. What's the probability that that turtle would put his head through this lifesaver, this buoy? And what's that probability? It's like zero. It's 0.0000000% of the reality. Some might say that that's exaggerated, but but let's look at what we just saw before. I mean, what's rare is not necessarily precious. It's to be rare and precious. This rebirth with these conditions is rare, difficult to find, and precious. Why is it precious? It's said that having these conditions and using them well is worth more than a wish granting gem. What would be a wish granting gem? Today, what would it be? A, a bank account with a couple billion? Would that be enough for all your worldly concerns, your worldly desires? I don't know. Let's say 10 billion. Because when you start to really, then there's a private plane, and then you need to buy ecologically fuel so that you keep your keep your image. It costs a lot more, etc., etc. Then 10 is not even that much. But anyway, a wish granting gem would satisfy any desire on a material level. So let's say 10 billion. So this money could give you a lot, but they can't give you stability, satisfaction, love, awareness, joy. They can't eliminate our traumas, our resentment, our pain, our envy, our jealousy, our fear, our ignorance. In other words, it doesn't matter how much money we have, how much power I have. I can be the most powerful man or woman on the planet. It's not able to cut the cycle of samsara. I can make a golden prison with a jacuzzi and with a cinema. I can put everything in my prison, but it's still a prison. There have been heads of criminal organizations in Central America, for example. I don't Chapo. I don't know that within this prison there was a zoo for the children. Everything you could imagine within this prison. You can do what you want, but you're still in prison. So having all that, money, it's just not enough to get out of the cycle of suffering of samsara. But instead, having the minimum necessary materially, having someone to guide you, and the sincere desire to walk the path, these are the necessary conditions to get out of samsara, which is really what we want from life to life. So it's an amazing, a unique opportunity. And I repeat, this doesn't make us better than others. It shows that we have unique conditions, and if we're able to use them favorably, that depends on us. Geshe Yeshe Wanchuk, one of the masters of Lama Ganden Rinpoche, also one of my teachers, he was one of the most learned teachers of our recent times, and a book that he wrote and a commentary of the Bodhisattva Charavatara, he said, imagine that someone comes and he loans you something that can print bills, money. It's legal. You can print as much money as you want. You can choose the bill. What do we want? Do we want bills of 5? No, let's make bills of 500. So we choose the bill that we want to print, but there's a condition. It's loaned to us, this printer, but the day that the owner wants it back, we need to give it back right away. We can't say, oh no, wait, I'm just going to finish another million here. No, we have to give it back when asked. So we don't know how long that's going to be. So here's a gift for you. You can, for a short time or a long time, we don't know how much time, you can print out the money that you want. What do we do with that printer? Do we just put it in the cellar? Oh no, I can't. I need to watch the last episode of my series. Oh no, I need to resolve this problem. Today I don't feel like it because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. No, maybe tomorrow I try. Every day, do we just look at it a little bit and we do nothing? Or we take it, we put it in the living room, and we make sure that there's somebody in the kitchen, make sure there's always someone there so we can print night and day so at least we print what will give us some kind of security, and then maybe we can relax a little bit. If someone who who if someone then takes something like that and they don't use it, what would we say to them? We'd say that you're stupid. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for someone else. So Geshe Yeshe Wanchuk would say that this lifetime is like that printer. We have a very powerful, we have these conditions, but today we say, oh, today I can't, and tomorrow can't. I know I have a precious life, but here and there. And then one day, the Lord of Death will come and say, this life, I am taking it back. And when the Lord of Death asks us for life again, we can't say, no, just a minute. Now I need to practice the Dharma. There's that opportunity is lost because this life is ours in the sense that we can decide what we want to do while we're alive, but we have no power over death. So Lama Tsongkhapa says that freedom and endowments are difficult to find and life is short. We are going to die. Even if every once in a while I hear people, if I were to die, and I ask myself, what alternative do you have? But I remind you that the problem is not dying. The problem is living badly. For as much as sorry as I am to see all the deaths in the news for all these conflicts, the sadness is not for death itself, but the violence, the violence that is created, and sorry for those who are killed and those who remain, but the problem is not dying, the problem is living badly. So in our small way, when we really start with sincerity, not on a conceptual way, but we look at ourselves and say, wow, I have a unique opportunity. It's no joke. So when someone asks you, what do you do in life? I practice the three principal aspects of the path. What do you want from life? I want to have this passion for nirvana. I want to be able to get out of this cycle of suffering. I want to be able to help other people do the same. This is what I want. No, but what do you do to survive? Oh, okay. Well, to make money, I work in a bank. I clean this, that. I do what's necessary to pay my bills. But what do I do with my life? What do I put at serve? How does my life serve? What does it serve? This life is too precious. Not life in general. Yes, this life is precious and marvelous. We need to protect life of everyone. That's why you also have this vow to protect life as the basis of non-violence. But the opportunity that we have, the favorable conditions that we have, are not easy to find, and they're extremely precious. But we don't know how long they're going to last, because the day we die, who tells us that we have the certainty to find the same conditions, to meet the same conditions? It's not obvious. So now that we have them, we need to take care of them well. That's why it says freedom and endowments are difficult to find and life is short. By gaining familiarity with this, attraction to the appearances of this life is eliminated. The appearances of this life are the things that that we project our happiness on, but then in actuality they cannot be sustained. It's what we talked about before. The appearances of this life means projecting our happiness on power, on wealth, on pleasures, etc., on our image, knowing that at the end of the day, it cannot sustain our happiness. When I recognize the preciousness of this life and the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the moment of death, then I say to myself, I don't have time to waste. At the very minimum, I need to assure myself, I need to secure a similar situation for my next life. And so to do this, what do I need to do? I need to avoid that which is negative. I need to try to die a person that is a little bit better than the one that was born, which is not that easy, which means that during our lifetime to not create new negative conditionings and try to at least to sustain the positive ones. So with this in mind, what's the priority in our life? Having a comfortable samsara, or getting out of samsara? The objective is no longer the objective is what do I become at the time of death? What kind of person am I at the time of my death? To be able to get to the moment of death and be without regret, at peace with oneself, with others. This is a priority. And if we were able to have a life that is coherent, and where we develop our qualities and lessen our negative conditionings, that has an enormous power. And to get more into details, we should talk about the 5 powers. But the point is, we need to do something to live life sincerely and deeply and with meaning, not just superficially. And so by doing this, we abandon what's called the appearances to this life. But the appearances of next life remain. And what are the appearances of the next life? So what you couldn't manage for this life that you've projected to the next. Sometimes I've explained that when we look at the various worldviews, the materialist view, this materialist utopia, is divided into 2 types. Where this view where one thinks that it's possible to experience a state of well-being through material gain. And there are 2 types. There's one type of person who thinks it's able to do it through wealth and pleasures and power, to find a balance, to find a state of peace, joy, well-being through an external, through something external. And then there are those who say, oh, well, in this life it's not possible, but if I'm good, I can have it next life. I'll be reborn in a paradise, in a kind of heaven. But the concept of heaven, what is it? It's a place where I can have everything I want. I'm free from everything I don't want, and I never have to be separated from what I like. So if we were to reinvent heaven today, we would put a quick internet connection, wouldn't we? Well, it depends on who you ask, but I'm sure if you asked, I'm sure children today would say heaven without video games, no way. Like once I found myself in a village in Tibet. I was by myself, and at a certain point I was surrounded by many people of the village. It was a very remote village. and talking a little bit with them. They weren't used to seeing Westerners, and even less seeing a Westerner speaking Tibetan. And there was a lady said, "Oh, how wonderful you live in the West. Bring me with you." And a little bit joking, she said, "Oh, you must be really beautiful with you." And I said, you know, there are positive aspects, but the butter isn't like the butter here. And tsampa, this Tibetan barley flour. There's no tsampa. The yak butter, the really fatty butter. We don't have that. And she said, "How could I live there? No way." So everyone projects his heaven based on one's own pleasures, attachments. So the appearances of next life is everything that we didn't manage to get in this life, but that we're counting on in the next. So here it says, by thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unfailing, and repeatedly contemplating the miseries of cyclical existence, attraction to the appearance of the future lives is eliminated. So when I do an action, and when I'm done with that, the karma is finished, but what's generated is the karmic force. It's like taking this stick that I throw. Once I've thrown the stick and I've opened up my hand, the action of throwing the stick is finished, but the stick is still flying in the air. That is thanks to the inertia of that action. Similarly, when we make an action, we do an action, that action is finished once we've done it, but a karmic force is generated. This force goes on until it doesn't meet something to interact with and bring a result. Like if I threw this in the space where there's no atmosphere, how long would it go round and turn? It would go as on and on and on until it met something that it would hit. Today, if I throw this, if I threw this out now, it would meet actually atmosphere and the force of gravity, and it would fall. But without that, it would just keep flying through the air. So all actions that we do generate a karmic force. At sooner or later, in front of other actions, they show their results. A little bit like the metaphor that's used is like a soil where many seeds are planted, and then one puts water, and so some sprout, some don't. So the actions that I've done in the past that have not given their fruit yet, the seeds are still within me. The things that I have done in this life and in past life, the moment I die, I bring those seeds with me. So even if I have a positive rebirth, who knows where, that karmic force of my past actions, I bring all of that with me. And it's only a question of conditions, because if the seeds are there, then we just need water for that sprout, the plant, and the fruit to come. So, reflecting on the law of karma, by thinking over and over again that actions and their effects are unfailing, every action is an interaction that brings a consequence. So a good rebirth is not that useful, given that I'm still in the cycle of samsara and I bring all of these seeds with me. And not just that, but at the same time, I'm still trapped in all-permeating suffering. So sooner or later, the suffering of change and the suffering of suffering, will all come out. I'm still in that same cycle. So when I'm able to see samsara clearly, this cycle, it doesn't matter where I'm going to be reborn. I mean, if it goes well, then I have a vacation in samsara, in the sense that I can be reborn in a context where I'm better off. But what's the point of being better off momentarily when sooner or later I'm going to fall again? So, what's important is to do something along the path to really sustain a state of well being that is long lasting. So it's important really to construct this state of peace and gradually get out of the cycle of samsara. So here, reflecting on karma, on samsara, on general and specific suffering of samsara, this aversion, this nausea for samsara is generated. And here, as a result, attraction to the appearances of future lives is eliminated. So the process is this. We recognize the preciousness of this life, and one realizes it once one reflects and thinks about the positive conditions that one has. One feels a deep joy. One says, wow, how lucky I am. But at the same time, right away, there's this feeling of saying, this is an opportunity that is unique, but I don't know how long it's going to last. And so the certainty of death and the uncertainty of the moment of death, this should come from our gut. Pabonka Rinpoche would say that you realize the certainty of a death when you get goosebumps and you feel that adrenaline. He would say most of us, we're like taking the sun on a chaise lounge, but in the mouth of the Lord of Death. We think about animals like sheep who are about to be it's like animals in a farm. You think you're there to be fed, but there are there to be fed so that then they can be killed. So we really don't know what's going to come first, tomorrow or our next life. We don't have this certainty. But anyway, as we're talking, if I were to ask you, but are you going to die? What would your answer be? Does anyone have any doubt whatsoever? Are you sure that you're going to die? Okay, you're sure. When? When are you going to die? Do you know? So you don't know when you're going to die. But this I don't know, is this an I don't know that includes today? Or is it an I don't know 15, 20 years from now? Knock on wood, not now. Normally, when we say I don't know, it's a kind of I don't know somewhere in the future. But when I ask you, are you going to die or not? Does this answer come from your head or from your gut? From the head, normally. And when I say, I don't know, even more so comes from the head. And we're strange because we believe that we're immortal within our own mortality. The fact of being aware of our own morality doesn't bring the fear of death. It should bring the urgency of living our meaningful way. I mean, dying is not a problem. We have died so many times. We die, we're reborn. We die, we're reborn. We've done it so many times. The problem is not dying. The problem is not using this opportunity well. Because at least if I think for myself, if I'm going to die today, where am I going to be reborn? Not so easy to answer. Not so easy to choose. Not so easy to choose. It's not so. it's not easy to choose. Then you get to that marvelous place, and at a certain point, what should I do? Am I there just taken by pleasures? It's not obvious, but it's not easy. For me, like when I think about it, where can I be reborn to have the same conditions that I have today? So I can't waste what I have today. I can't waste this opportunity. And what's beautiful is that if I use it well, I give myself the certainty of a positive continuation. If I waste it, happens with us and with us with human beings, is we have an enormous potential. We have enormous potential to do positive things and enormous potential to do terrible things. When I think about the precious human rebirth, but if we use the precious a precious human rebirth for bad, it's better to be a dog or a bird. I don't know, because the potential to do bad can become an absolute disaster. If we use this human rebirth in the positive way, it's marvelous. So in just a few words, it's a unique opportunity. I don't know how long it's going to last. I need to use it well. I need to use it to cultivate what I want to bring with me the day I die, to leave something good in the world. I need to live life in a consistent, virtuous way, coherent way. And when we're able, with this thought, naturally it brings us to what Lama Tsongkhapa describes in the next verse, where he says, Detar gompe korwe punsokla, yimyum kechik sangyang mi kishing nitsen kupu tarpa dunyerlo juna detse nejun kepat lag. This is one of the verses that when I read this is one of the verses that touched me the most. And I spent about 1.5 years on this verse. And it says, when having trained in that way, you're having familiarized oneself in that way, makes reference to having familiarized oneself with the preciousness of this life, the certainty of death, the certainty of the uncertainty of the time of death, the law of karma, samsara, etc. When having familiarized myself in that way, there's no arising, not even for a second. There's no arising, not even for a second, of attraction or interest to the excellencies of cyclic existence. And day and night, the intention-seeking liberation arises. Then the thought of renunciation has been generated. Then the definite emergence has been generated. What does this mean? When I read this for the first time, I thought, oh, I'm in a bad way. I mean, if this is the first prerequisite for the spiritual path, to develop this definite emergence, and it's generated when there's not even a second, there's no space for any desire for the pleasures of samsara. I asked myself, is it possible? And for about 1.5 years, I stayed on this, thinking about this. And I found 3 answers with 3 masters that I discussed. I talked to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I talked to Lama Ganden Rinpoche, and also Geshe Rinchen, Thupten Rinchen, my philosophy teacher. To summarize, first of all, the so-called renunciation is about loving oneself. It's not. It's not about renouncing something. It's about going towards something, and it's a gradual path. It's not immediate. It's something that it should be developed little by little. It's like one falls in love little by little until one is full of love and passion. But it's not a love that just happens like this. It's constructed little by little. It's gradual. And the third point, it's possible. Is it possible to diminish anger or jealousy? It's difficult, tiresome, but it's possible. If one acts in a certain way, one familiarizes oneself, one's thoughts and actions in a certain way, then it's possible to have less anger. What's the limit? Is there a threshold that that you can't go below? No. The threshold would be arriving to the point where there's no situation that makes you lose your patience. I mean, is it possible to love one person more? What's the limit for that? What limits our love is our own selfishness. Is it possible to love more and more and more sincerely, more an altruistic way, unconditional way, where there's no limit of that of selfishness in between? So the answer is it's possible to get out of samsara, because it's possible to diminish our mental defilements, and it's possible to develop our qualities to their maximum potential. We need time and effort, but it's possible. And when Buddha Shakyamuni described the process of becoming a Buddha, required 3 eons from this moment of generating renunciation. You need to start counting then. When I saw that, I thought, I said, okay, thank goodness. I mean, even Buddha says it needs 3 eons. It's a very, very, very long time. Remember that time is relative, but the fact that it requires a lot of time is something positive. It's like looking at a mountain and saying that if I see this mountain and say, can I get to the top of the mountain? And maybe there's a little small trail, and little by little I can walk to get to the top of the mountain. Then I go. But if they say, here's the mountain, and you need to actually scale the side of the side of the cliff of the mountain, I'm not even going to try. But if you tell me it's a gradual path, then I say, okay. I realize that it's gradual and possible, and it requires time. The process itself of developing this definite emergence, it is gradual, a little bit at a time, and little by little one gets there. So one of my masters said something to me that really touched me. It was the 6th Dalai Lama, and he said in Tibetan, let's remember that Sayang Gyatso, the sixth Dalai Lama, he didn't want to follow the monastic life or have any kind of political power in Tibet. He didn't want to be the king of Tibet. He escaped from the Potala palace quite young, and he was full of girlfriends. And yeah, even a century later, all the the houses around the Potala were painted. Those were the girlfriends of the sixth Dalai Lama. And then he actually gave up his title, and they named the seventh Dalai Lama while the sixth was still alive. But that's another story. He was a great poet, and he would write love poems. And there was one verse, and he uses this in two different poems. In one case, it's to one specific woman. And in another poem is to women in general. And he says, here's a commentated translation. He says, if I desired enlightenment as much as I desire you, I'd already be enlightened. He actually literally says, if my just as my mind goes there, if my mind could go towards a pure Dharma, then I would already be enlightened. And so he was absolutely right, because when we're in love with something or something, or those who fall in love with themselves, when we're in love with something, how much energy do we put into that thing? A lot, just a little bit? Once someone said to me, someone who was deeply in love, how often do you think about that person? And the answer was one time that never ends. When we really want something, we have passion for something, that thing is constantly present in our thoughts. So when Lama Tsongkhapa says, when by having trained in that way, there is no arising, you're no longer projecting your things into mundane things. No arising, not even for a second, of attraction, the essence of cyclic existence. So your desire to reach nirvana, if once that is constantly present, the thought of renunciation has been generated. And this means falling in love with nirvana, falling in love with inner peace, having that passion that is present in everything that we do. Actually, this isn't something that is so far, so impossible. It depends on where we put our energy. And that's why that first thing, when we do practices, when we start teachings, when we start a meditation, is to regenerate our motivation, where we ask ourselves, what do we want? Okay, take care of, it's fine to take care of our family, to resolve problems, take care of our material things, our job, etc. Fine, go on vacation, but deeply, deeply, what do I want? Really, beyond all of this, what do I want? And it's important to say, okay, that's fine for all these other things, to get into that thing where one tries to renounce everything to go somewhere else. That's dangerous. There's a real story, actually, of an English lady who, quite a few years ago, she was a doctor, and she listens to Buddhist teachings. She generated this enormous desire to get out of samsara. She left her family, she left her job, she separated from her husband, her children. She went to live on the other end of the world. She became a nun. Years go by in a in a nunnery in the north of India. She did a tremendous amount, but after 3 or 4 years, maybe even more, she doesn't obtain what she was expecting. Maybe she was satisfied, but she's not where she thought she would become. She wasn't a Buddha. And then she dropped everything. She went back home. Her husband wasn't there. She wasn't able to get back to work. She had an enormous quantity of problems. And then it seemed like it was almost the fault of Dharma, fault of Buddhism. It's very important to understand that developing this definite emergence doesn't mean to abandon our everyday life. It means living it through a different lens, for a different purpose. We have a body that needs to be fed, we need a place to sleep, etc. We live in a society that has its rules that need to be respected. We've taken commitments that need to be upheld. We have our family. We have work. We need to pay taxes. That's all fine. But what's important is that all of this is not an end in and of itself, but that there is a greater end, to get out ourselves of the cycle of suffering. And tomorrow we'll look at an objective that's even greater, which is putting ourselves at the service of others. But what do I really want? More than anything else, I want peace. I want inner peace. I want to be at peace with myself. I want to be at peace with others. I want to be part of the solution. I want to be part of a positive interdependence and not a negative interdependence. I want to really get out of this cycle of mental defilements. I'm tired of being egocentric and selfish and taken by anger and selfishness and aversion. I have this illusion that in the good sense of the word, this passion, this strong desire to say, how wonderful would it be if I was able to be at peace with myself and with others, if I was able to feel a sincere feeling of love towards others, where no matter what happens, nothing can take me away from a state of balance. If I could be at peace with my past and my present, we want this, don't we? Desiring this is what I'm talking about. This is loving oneself. And as a consequence of loving oneself, what do? I cultivate what's good for me and I abandon what's detrimental, what's bad for me. So this first step is taking care of ourselves. On a deeper level, we have an objective that transcends our own mundane needs. And this is the first part. And this first part of the path, and there's an enormous amount of teachings dedicated to this, how to develop it, how to abandon what is bad for us, how to cultivate what's good for us, recognizing what's bad for us, recognizing what's good for us. Lama Ganden taught this in Self-Healing 1, just knowing how to distinguish between true friends and false friends. And Lama Ganden gave the example of coffee. You think that coffee is your friend, but actually, at the end of the day, is it good for us or bad for us? What's one of the greatest the symptoms in society today is anxiety, and coffee, does it increase our anxiety? These kinds of stimuli, they increase our anxiety. we're extremely, uh, uh, we have a hard time staying still. We have a hard time slowing down, but we're constantly overstimulating ourselves even more, even with substances. This is a false friend. And then after years, he stopped using it as an example because he realized that the coffee is so deeply rooted in the culture. I'm going to stop. Yeah, I'm using this example. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my disciples. But I never drank coffee. Once I tried. Because when I was a child, I saw my parents. They had just met Lama Ganchen, and 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 they were trying to put into practice this teaching. And at home there was this tragedy of trying to not drink coffee, and I looked at them. I looked at myself. I said, why would I even try? My mom had me taste it without any sugar, and I thought, oh, why would I ever drink this? But the original cause was from these teachings. Anyway, um, it's part of this passage to love ourselves, what's good for us, what's bad for us, and without studying anything else. If we simply were able to apply diligently to avoid what's bad for us and cultivate what's good for us, with more um, with more important, then we're able to do so much. Because this first point of the definite emergence, there's a great challenge. The stronger our definite emergence, the 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 easier this challenge is. It's this challenge of avoiding what is pleasurable but that's bad for us, and cultivating what we don't like but that is good for us. And this is a challenge that we all have, the way of eating, the way of speaking, the way of interacting, all aspects of our life. And just as a side note, a great part of our modern sicknesses, COVID aside, the pandemic that we're living is cancer. And I heard numbers that are just incredible. The number of people who um, uh, become sick with tumor is just enormous. They're saying that in Holland, about half of the population is affected by a tumor. In Italy, it's about a third. It's no joke. And all the research, they say that the cause of the cause, about more than 65%, is a bad lifestyle, things that we can avoid. The amount of sugar that the amount of sugar, the bad sleep, lack of exercise, etc. It's a very stressful life, etc., that creates a level of a kind of a chronic inflammation because we have high levels of cortisol, etc., and we're always needing to take decisions. These are all things that depend on us, and often we're not able to avoid them because we give more importance to what we like, even that's bad for us, instead of what's good for us. So it's a challenge that we have as a society to go beyond I like, I don't like. And the things that are good for me, then very good.
Non è come il proverbio tibetano che è un po' estremista che dice tutto ciò che è dolce è veleno, tutto ciò che è amaro è medicina. È un po' estremo, no? Però l'essenza è abbandoniamo ciò che ci fa male, coltiviamo ciò che ci fa bene. E su questo c'è una cosa per concludere. Allora, you go, no problem. Esiste un detto che secondo me ha molto senso qui, ed è quando noi guardiamo tutto questo che viene dalla Lama Tsongkhapa, originalmente da Buddha, vediamo in noi stessi in questo momento con le condizioni che abbiamo, la domanda che mi pongo è: se non io chi? Se non adesso quando? Se non sono io a cambiare la mia vita, chi lo farà? Se non sono io a evitare le cose che mi fanno male, chi lo farà? E se non adesso, quando? Cosa devo aspettare? Cosa? Qual è la scusa di questa volta? Non ce n'è. Quindi ci vuole un senso di urgenza. Qualcuno dirà, ma è un po' pesante. Sì. C'è una parte per dire smettiamo di prenderci in giro. C'è una parte che dice prendiamoci sul serio. No? C'era una pubblicità in Brasile che diceva o tempo passa, o tempo voa e a poupança bamerindos continua numa boa. E ho adattato che diceva o tempo passa, o tempo voa e o samsara continua numa boa. No? Il tempo passa, il tempo vola e il samsara continua sempre bene. Passa un giorno, passa l'altro, oggi ho un problema, domani ho un altro, oggi ho un piacere, domani ho un altro, oggi c'è una cosa, domani c'è un'altra e noi siamo lì a rigirare intorno, a fare le stesse cose. Per questo esiste un'attitudine che è importante come conclusione. Aspettiamo, ora che tanto le altre cose era ripetizione di cose che abbiamo già detto, aspettiamo un attimo. Perciò,
So,
se non io chi?
if not me, then who? Then, and if not now, then when?
Se non io
If
a
not,
evitare ciò che mi fa male, chi lo farà?
if I'm not the one to avoid what's bad for me, then who will do it? If I'm not the one to cultivate what's good for me, who will do it for me? And if I'm not the one to gain clarity about what I want for my life, who's going to do it for me?
Quando andrò in pensione?
When will I do it? When I
Quando
when I retire?
sarò, non lo so,
When I
non
will?
c'è da aspettare.
I mean, there's no time
Sono scuse.
to wait. There are no excuses.
Quindi questo porta
And
veramente un
this
senso di urgenza,
brings this sense of urgency and this joy of making
tutto per dire
life
bello che posso
um,
fare qualcosa di significativo nella mia vita.
th-
È un percorso
this it's a long process, but I'm walking in the right direction, and how wonderful that I have this opportunity to make my life meaningful. And when we generate this urgency and we walk in the right direction towards inner peace, then we have developed this so-called definite emergence, renunciation, and it's a marvelous, marvelous step. So,
perciò
so to let's conclude here. It's time for our dedications. Tomorrow we will look at the second part, which has to do with bodhicitta,
che riguarda la mente altruista,
the altruistic mind and development of love for others, and then after the correct view of reality. Tomorrow morning we will do again the Guru Yoga of Lama Tsongkhapa together. So those, if you don't have the sadhana, please get it and bring it for tomorrow morning.
Jetsun lame kutse rapten chin nam kara trin le chochur ge padang Lo san tempe drume sasum ge drove munsela tato ne gyurchi kewa kunto yanda lama dan rame cheki pela long chechi sada lamge yende dorje changi kopa nyurto Nimodele tsendele nime kuyan delekşin Ninsen takto delekpe Kuncho sumke chingilo Kuncho sumke ngodrubotsol Kuncho sumke trashisho All'alba
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday,
del giorno possono i
may
tre
the three
gioielli
jewels grant us their
delle loro
blessings.
benedizioni
May
possono
they
aiutarci ad
help us.
ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e
May they
cospargerci il
help us
sentiero della
to.
nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio.
May they grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Nime tsewe terce ceresi rime kempe wampo jampe upumalu jamse sangwe kanchen kepe tsogen tsongkhapa lo san trakpe shabla asolwade.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see each other tomorrow morning.